Hello and welcome to Sparks, A Tale of Ink. This is a newish, kind of, visual novel by, I believe their handle is that guy, Chris, but it just goes by Chris, I think. Hold on. Yeah, Chris. Surprised by Neku, background artist, Kemi, etc., etc., etc. You can't actually see the mouse pointer, and it's that little thing that you see right there below Sparks, but it makes it very hard to figure out where I need to point. Anyways, see, it freezes when I get out of the menu. Anyways, so the story is about, I believe, this guy that we see right here. I believe they use ink in some way or another. I forget how though. And I believe they have one eye bandaged up, which is the one that they're covering. I don't know why though. I suppose we'll find out sooner or later. And unfortunately, that's all I can really tell you. Because I don't really know much about the story and I didn't read the synopsis on Itch.io. So yeah, we're going into this blind, everyone. Anyway, so yeah, without further ado, let us begin Sparks, A Tale of Ink. Prologue. Thus ruled the sovereign. Final chapter. Thus he held the final divine remnant in his hands, the still beating heart of a dead god. As the king felt it merge with his own body, memories flooded back into his mind. Times of happiness with the man he loved more than anything in the world. Times of war and conflict that the two of them could overcome together. Times of loss as he held the lifeless body of his beloved in his hands on that fateful night. Times of change as the messenger from the stars began to talk to him, giving the king advice on where to go and what to prepare for. Times of disaster as the owner of the heart he now held was attacked by a fell creature. And lastly, the decisions he made to save those who would still hang onto hope. The remnants of power still cracked through his veins after a hidden potential awoke to him at the border of despair and hope. He had lit the very first spark, the spark of hope. And now, he would have to clear the dark clouds of calamity that were covering Cirque's skies with the might of a god and his newfound ability at his side. With all his hope for the future, he only wished that his lover was still looking onto him as he ascended the world's throne as a sovereign, changing Cirque forever. This reads like a religious children's bedtime tale. Chapter 1. What we want, what we need. As Zhangken closed the book, he let out a soft groan and dropped the volume on the floor next to his bed, a small dust cloud rising up in response. I'm assuming that's like Jean Li or Jean Gare. Zhangken. So I'm gonna keep pronouncing it Zhangken until I'm corrected, okay? 3, 4, 8, 10. 10 more pages that are just to praise the sovereign. Again. How dare anyone call this facts in their right mind? The lack of any information regarding agriculture, cuisine, battle techniques, anything. At best, this was a bad attempt at historic romance. No, wait, unless... Where are the sources? He proceeds to shoot up to his feet and immediately felt his back hurt. Regret for the sudden movement coursed through his being. How long had he been curled up in this horrible reading position now? He couldn't recall. While doing some stretches to relieve the pain, his gaze wandered through his dorm room. The wooden floor was holding up well, despite the dust that it had been collecting for who knows how long, in addition to being assaulted with books on the regular. The smell of burnt wax and smoke lingered everywhere, especially in the fabrics of his bed, his clothes and fur. It was hard to get rid of those when he couldn't open the window during the rainy seasons, lest he'd desired water damage on the books. The mere thought of it made his fur bristle. He gave a quick glance to his desk. He could check what he had written down during previous reading sessions, but on second thought, I'm gonna shorten it to Jean, okay? Jean sat down once again, with a heavy sigh. In his head, he started to recount what the book that he had just read stated, and realized that the focus was overtly on the relationship between the king and his second-in-command. How come I never noticed at the many moments those two spent together in the lush fields, the noisy taverns, the cozy fireplaces? I should begin to inquire better on these works with others in the future. Drained of energy, he opened the book to check when it was written. The foreword didn't even include a date of publishing. Horrible, non-standard. And the rescribes didn't even fix it. How hard could it be to plaster a date somewhere? He kept mumbling to himself as he found the afterword, once he got past the many more pages that told of the sovereign's many deeds. Deeds Jean couldn't care less for. The student finally found the author's name, Selim Swiftquill. His title implied that this man had penned even more books, a thought that made Jean shiver. A page after credit the rescribes that were responsible for the book. They probably put more effort into publishing copies of this piece of ash than the author did when writing it. The next few pages included more unnecessary credits that Jean skipped over until he finally found a number. 1996? Really? That's atrocious, even for a delusional piece of fiction. What's this here, then? We attribute this work to the learnings of ascension that he taught us. No. Full of spite, he tossed the book into the air. Of course. Written by some religious zealots. Of course this wouldn't lead him anywhere new. Only once again back to the start. Already at the brink of yelling at a curse he learned from his grandmother, Jean wanted to catch the volume again so as not to suffer a concussion until he realized that a small piece of paper was fluttering down next to it. Immediately he thought that it had been his fault, that he tore away a corner of the page and went through the scenarios in his head of what would happen if he returned the book in this state. A second cataclysm to tear the sky and sea asunder, ash and molten stone raining down on his head. Perhaps he could ask Gale to fix it for him, but then he wouldn't have returned any of the favors that they did for him yet at all. Before more scenarios could go through his head, the book already landed back on his head, and the torn piece of paper on his knees. To his relief, he noticed that the page didn't belong to the book at all. The material and handwriting were completely different from the rest of the dreadful tome. Strangely enough, it didn't line up with any writings he had seen before. The book he just finished was from the Flatlands and had a curvy style, but what he saw here was very different. An elegant form with strict lines and no smudges at all. A truly professional calligrapher must have written it. Slightly awestruck, Jean actually took to read what was written on the paper, only to be disappointed by it being some nonsense, with a single cryptic sentence next to it. Ascension's truth. Right at the et, his Enem 4, page 38. He turned the piece around to be greeted by a cut-off sentence that reached the end of the page. Mechanwaith, Enaid a dant e drag? The Veridan tongue. He easily recognized it, as it was one of the many languages that were no longer spoken after the sovereign's ascension. They were found in books written by the last king himself, though. Yet the strange note intrigued him far more. Ascension's truth? Right at what? And who did this Enon belong to? Curiosity immediately crept up on him. Someone who must be doing similar research to him, then hid a note in this book. No one else would look at it other than those desperate for knowledge, such as himself. Immediately the euphoria of discovering turned into a sense of dread. Sure, he had found something of import, but what would he do with it? He had no clue as to how to decipher the code, nor could he read the text to assign it to any textbook. The potential truth of the world was at his fingertips, and he couldn't even solve the hint that he had received. Jean felt just as pathetic as he had at home. He fell back and kept looking at the piece of paper, taking in the rain that was falling against the window. Truth of why the world was forced to exist like this. Perhaps the records were just that. Truth. But why, then, had there never become more of it? You will never find the truth if you aren't even looking for it. One of the many platitudes Caellam came up with to motivate him in the face of roadblocks that he couldn't overcome himself. Caellam. Perhaps... Zhangken shot up and grabbed into the brown leather bag that was sitting next to his bed. He sifted through a book bound in brown leather, stopping at a very specific page. There he found the timetable of Caellam's lectures for the month. He was in a lecture now, but Zhangken could probably ask him about it afterwards. Zhangken himself might be at a loss, but his professor had always been encouraged to ask for help. So what kept him from it? He grabbed his bag and slung it over his shoulder, then proceeded to look at his own calendar. These were located in every dorm room. While the pages were slightly yellowed with age, it was in good condition still. No need to change what isn't broken. He made sure that he was on the right day, and in shock realized that the month of downpour was ending in just 2 days. It was easy to lose track of time, but the calendars were installed in such a way that a ray of light could be focused through the windows onto the current day. People worked hard on that technique for years. Whoever set them up must live a life of luxury now. He discarded the thought and took in a sharp breath, leading him to cough immediately from the dust that he had swirled up. With confidence in his mind, Zhangken snapped the thumb and middle finger of his right hand, making the fire of his fireplace and candles disappear. A familiar warmth filled Zhangken's chest for a moment, and after taking a deep breath, he opened the door and left his room. The first lecture hall was easily located. Caellam was luckily always assigned to the same one. At some point, he said that it was simply a location he preferred, even though all the lecture halls were supposed to look the same. He opened the door to the hall with the horrible antlered knob and started looking for a vacant seat. Between the mixed figures of listeners, he could also spot some people from his own inauguration. After all, there was no rigid timetable to adhere to. He let himself fall onto a chair next to a pair of students who were squinting their eyes, looking at the illegible writing that the raccoon plastered onto the board and back on their own books. Zhangken chuckled with confidence and inched closer to the two of them. His experience with the rather eccentric history professor had been similar. Zhangken reached for one of his own notebooks with precision and put it down so that the other two, who started focusing on him instead of the lecture, could take a peek into the notes. He's explaining Sorites again, isn't he? It wasn't even a question. It is said that the world had fallen into patterns at the behest of the sovereign, but people are doing so as well. They are just harder to spot. Every now and then, Caellam had to talk about how he had revolutionized the water system for the bigger cities thanks to his discovery of notes on the so-called Sorites. One of them, a panther dressed in light robes, stared back at him. Aye, and me and my mate here can't follow a single word he's saying. We both know our ins and outs of basic sparks and such. But what in the name of the depths is he talking about? What exactly do you mean? He likes to talk a lot when the day is long. Steel construct systems lie down a redundant feedback loop of ink-based circuits that either lead to a positive feedback loop or an exposure of muted negative feedback with a suppressed loop if transparent absorbed casings is used. What in the name of the sea does he mean? He means... well... he's just talking words he reads and uses them to appear smarter. What now? The words. He doesn't know what they mean either. He just wants to appear smart. He just what? What kind of history professor just makes things up? Believe it or not, the best one out there. He has helmed every single expedition to Old World ruins so far, organizing and executing them. Is that why he's wearing those garish Old World clothes? Yes, he apparently found the patterns for them on his very first foray and has been wearing them ever since. People never see him without the coat. So he just wants to make things seem more interesting then. Doesn't help me understand anything that he said about them damn stones though. I only know that they remember sparks or something. Exactly, and you can build complex systems around them. Like what? I certainly could explain them, but I feel like what would be much more favorable is a practical demonstration. You've been listening in, haven't you? The question wasn't directed at the other student, but rather somewhere else as Zhangken raised his voice. The broad-shouldered professor downstairs only nodded, looking up to the two, who also began drawing the gaze of other listeners. Zhangken stood up and reached out as Caellam threw a small black gemstone at him. Smooth to the touch, he almost dropped it but managed to grasp it properly. The surface was non-reflective, and he could feel something wrapped around the stone akin to a thread. With turning it a little, he could see that a thread connected down to the end of the lecture hall, where Caellam was holding a different sodite. What's that now? Your cue, I'd say. Do you have any ink? What kind of question is that? Of course I do. The panther grasped a ring similar to the one that Zhangken wore and took it off. It was made from transparent, glass-like material and filled almost to the brim with a white substance. Are you ready down there? I'm always ready. Can we start? Sure can. Stone in hand, Caellam went to the window with it. He opened a small compartment with trained expertise, then held it outside into the rain. Well, what now? Now you put some ink on the stone. Easy as that. Said and done, the panther pulled a small latch on the ring's side, letting a droplet of ink escape from its confines. For a moment, things went well, until the water began pouring out of every inch of the stone. In disgust, Zhangken dropped the sodite and accidentally rammed his hand into the panther's side, who still had the compartment of his ring opened. The sudden movement made more droplets of the substance spray around. They landed on Zhangken's hand and the panther's cheek. Pain spread through his hand immediately, and he screamed out loud. Oh, flames! What did you do? I didn't do anything. You hit me. The panther was holding his cheek where the ink landed, likely feeling the same pain as Zhangken. How do I make it stop hurting? Just wait a bit. It's been... He inhaled sharply. Just a droplet. The sensation should be gone in a moment. What happened? Didn't you know that you're not supposed to touch ink? It's the first thing that young sparkers learn. Water had begun to pool on the floor from the sodite that he dropped before. Coordinating his legs was hard as he still felt the sharp pain course through his hand, all the while Caellam's booming laughter got louder by the moment. The pain had finally started to fade as Caellam picked up the stone that had stopped emitting water and threw it out the window compartment he opened earlier. He cast it out with precision, despite the angle being extremely sharp. Then he placed his own sodite down on the wet floor and poured a drop of ink from a smaller glass onto it as well. In the blink of an eye, the water was gone. Thank you, Professor. No problem, boy. I like helping out those that bite off more than they can chew, and let me tell you, dear Zhangken here always picks the biggest meals from the pile. His laughter filled the hall once again. He then checked on the two students to make sure that they were fine. Other than his wet paw, Zhangken felt fine and grumbled a thank you in his direction. His streak of being an inconvenience kept going on. If you have been observing, he turned to the entire class now. This is what a positive feedback loop on the basis of the interior looks like. The sodite that I used absorbed water and the signal was led to the other sodite that would have been redistributing it. As it was the recipient of the signal, it kept going on as long as there was input, and that is how the water system in this academy works. Note that down, please. It will be relevant for the test. Now, everyone can go. Except for Zhangken. I assume that there is a reason why you came to attend a lecture for a class that you had already passed. After everyone had left, student and professor looked at each other for a few moments, the silence only broken by the rain and wind outside. Then Caellam burst into laughter. You have quite the knack for this, you know. Excuse me? You know, causing trouble. Please, you know full well that I don't do it on purpose. Yet it seems like trouble follows your every tiny little step. But that aside, what is so urgent that you need to sit through a lecture? Well, half of a lecture at least, just to talk with me. Right. You see, I got desperate and looked through any kinds of the books that was talking about the Sovereign's ascension. Did you find anything important? Anything new about his name? His species? His lover? The strange creature from the heavens that assisted him? No, nothing at all. So a day well spent then. I hope you enjoy a taste of what it is like to investigate old world business. No, I really don't. But that's not my point. Here, look at this. He produced a scrap of paper. It's not made of the same paper as the book that I found it in. Look, there's some notes here. What? What is this text on the other side? I can't read it. It's in the verdant tongue. Zhangken. It refers to the dragons in some way. To dragons? Yes, here. Drag means dragon. We found the word next to a drawing of what we concluded as being one. This might be a huge discovery, as we barely have any references to the creatures themselves. What about the rest of the text? Can you read that as well? Admittedly, no. Not without reference material. Let me copy this text so that I can look up what this might mean. Are your studies on the Verdant tongue going anywhere? I figured that I might try learning more of it when I have further access to materials from the old world. Right. I would grant you permission, but the whole Historian Association has to oversee your progress and give a majority vote and all that. Which makes the fact that one book written in old world language has been damaged even more concerning. I was hoping that you might know where this belongs to. As I said, I don't. What about the other side? The numbers and enim. Ascension's truth. Oh, that's not hard to solve. I think I figured it out already. A feeling of glee overcame Zhangken upon hearing this. Finally, progress? So, what is the solution then? I figured that it'd be best that you find out yourself, lad. As his emotions had soared, they came crashing down immediately. It felt as if a hammer struck him and knocked the air out of his lungs. What? Oh, you know, proactivity is the essence of discovery. Do it yourself or you'll never do it. I am unsure where to start then. Well, perhaps you can find the person who wrote it. If they are a student or on the Academy's educational body, you know who to ask. I'm not going to Gale's sparring lessons. You might just have to. It's all that they have scheduled in the next few days, and they like to retreat into solitude after teaching all day. Oh, ashes. I don't want to learn anything about combat. I don't care. Come on, Zhangken. Without sacrifice, discovery is out of reach. Fine, I'll do it. But you know full well that I won't enjoy it. Lightspeed lad, let's meet for lunch again tomorrow in case any of us make a discovery to any degree, yes? Sounds good to me. With a heavy sigh, Zhangken left the auditorium. Though process seemed to be imminent, the sacrifice he had to make for it felt as if it favored him less than any other risk that could have been taken. Scenarios of what would come next were already playing on repeat in his head, like a painter that drew over his own pictures, showcasing only one. He hated it more than touching the water from before. Zhangken could have stood before the door to the auditorium for a few more moments, pondering the very steps that led him to returning here. He pushed away memories of his first and, to date, last lesson in this very room. Alas, he had to go in there again if he wanted to further his own goals, even if it came at the cost of his nerves. He forcefully grabbed the doorknob and felt the antlers dig into his paw, and eased off immediately. Whose idea were these horrible things anyways? Cautiously, he poked his head through the opening to assess the situation. Immediately, the familiar professor's voice toned up to his ears. At least, He didn't go to the wrong hall by mistake this time. The rows were filled by a huge number of young students, new arrivals who were present at the introduction ceremony just a few days ago. Though the academy didn't force any uniforms onto students or professors, many showed up wearing light clothing. Different colors and fabrics indicated the diverse origins of the students at the academy, but the similar cuts of clothes they wore betrayed the picture of a diverse world. They were free to come and study whatever subject they preferred under a single condition. Everyone that had wanted to attend the academy for free had to discover and demonstrate their spark. The lecturing hall had a hanging smell of writing ink and mixed musks of students, combined with hints of different soaps. The scribble of quills on paper fought a losing battle against the wind, rain, and lightning raging outside. A harmony that would comfort him. Yet it was the subject being taught that filled him instead with dread. In trying to look for a free seat, he stared down to the bottom of the lecture hall, where the familiar white-furred fox kept talking about the history of combat and its current-day applications. This nonsense again. Zhangken mumbled as he took a seat as far removed from everyone else as possible. Yet he drew a few eyes of attention and smirked. Could he possibly persuade them against learning the arts of combat? War were a thing of the old world after all. Unless you were fighting the dreaded dull beasts. You there, girl, with the thick arms. What do you hope to gain from learning how to wield a sword? The girl didn't want to draw her eyes away from the professor at the front and tried to answer as subtly as possible. I want to join the Sovereign's army and eradicate the dull beasts. Her voice was louder than expected, and Zhangken flinched in response. Gale did not react to it, though. Shh. But why? There are so many professionally trained soldiers who go and hunt them already. If they fall in battle, they need to be replaced. I need to do my part to make the world safer. After all, they aren't invincible, you know. What do you mean? When I was much younger, my home got invaded by one of those creatures and a brave soldier sacrificed herself to save us. Her partner killed the beast and we had to relocate to the capital. Then you could just fight them with your spark, no? What's yours? I can reshape flames. See? That is already such a useful ability to use on the battlefield. Why go out of your way and learn how to wield a weapon of steel? Because... Both the girl and Zhangken flinched as they heard the professor speak up and turned around. Their uneven gaze fixed to the two of them. A weapon is not a finite resource. But on the battlefield, one quickly finds themselves out of ink. Thus, the fool who does not bring a weapon for protection falls to their own arrogance. The girl and everyone else in the lecturing hall as well wrote down what Gale said straight away, while Zhangken sighed in frustration. Now to you, Zhangken. Your comments made it clear that you have no intention of learning today. Is your only purpose to disrupt? I actually came to ask a question. During my lesson, why, is it combat related? Well, no. Then perhaps it would be a better choice to wait until after and not complain about me talking about the current subject. Well, I intended to wait, but your irrational hatred of weapon-based combat had you talking again to my students during my lesson. I just don't think it's all that useful. I see. Would you join me at the front then? I'm not practically fond of... That was not a request. Come here. Now. Zhangken contemplated his situation and slowly made his way to the front where his friend waited. He could have simply turned around to exit, but that would have left Zhangken standing on an even looser foot with them than before. With a heavy heart and a sense of dread building in his chest, he chose to stand right in front of Gale, only barely matching their height. As always, their mismatched eyes didn't betray a single thought that was going on in Gale's head. Though if Zhangken had to guess, what would come next was to be a mix between education and humiliation. At least you seem to understand your situation. Splendid. Dear students, This is Zhangken, one of the oldest students gracing our halls these days, not because he has been here for very long, but rather due to his late decision to join us here. Hey, I decided not by my own accord that my spark awakened so late. You could have always joined us the other way. Whatever. I'm not having this discussion now, not in front of everyone. What is it that you want then? I could ask you the same thing. What is it that you promised yourself to get for barging into my lesson? Well, found a clue while doing research and needed your help. Yet another delusional request regarding your strange quest to prove me wrong in believing that the Sovereign is a true god of the New World that I assume. Perhaps today I shall humor you, if you would be so kind as to assist with the demonstration of stances and their import in battle. He would have declined on the spot if it weren't for the fact that he really needed Gale's assistance in a matter. So he stood upright and nodded, despite the impending ridicule that he could already feel on the tip of his tongue. I do have to admit, though, I didn't bring any of my countless training swords that decorate my room, so I have to say, then I shall supply you with one. I would not be teaching combat if I were not ready to grant arms at any given time, my friend. Ashes. He cursed under his breath. Gale swiftly procured an additional sword from a rack located near the podium and then drew the one they were carrying along. Carefully, they laid both of them onto the podium itself and touched each of them. Sharp. A single word resounding with power, echoing through the entire lecture hall. A clear shiver could be felt by everyone witnessing Gale's powerful spark at work as they lifted their fingers from the swords. The action had no indicator that it happened. Usually a spark drew from a visual or audible indicator. The power simply became true. It was not like the swords lost their sharpened edge. Rather, it was as if the swords had always been blunt. As with every time that Gale used their spark, a slight feeling of unease crept over Zhangken, and he could tell from looking at those sitting in the seats. He could see them shivering, confused, or nauseous. Zhangken could be assured that they all felt unease after Gale uttered the sword's state. A terrifying power used for such a normal act. There was a reason why Gale had been chosen to become an inheritor of the Twistwood title. With one hand, he took up the sword Gale had taken from the rack, while the professor wielded their own. It was more decorated than the practice sword handed off to the students. While Gale fluidly took on a stance that he could remember seeing once before, Zhangken tried to follow suit, imitating something that he had seen in one of the practice books. His legs slid slightly apart while he held the sword with both hands in front of his body. What are you doing there? Why are you holding the blade with both hands? It could not be clear that the sword that I gave you is a one-handed weapon. Well, then what am I supposed to do with my other hand, His hands were wrapping around the stout leather of the handle before. Now his left one let go and started hanging off to the side. He could admire the simple yet forward forge work of the sword in his hand for a few more hours if he were given the time, but as Gale already built a visible tension, he knew that he would have to react soon. Zhangken tried to assemble his thoughts and memories, drawing a line with his mouth in order to assume a proper fighting stance as well. Right foot forward, left foot back, hand behind his back, clutching a fist, blade slightly angled, horizontal before him. It looked a bit like the one that he assumed before, but this was supposed to give him a better flow of energy. Oh, rain stance? Against another one-handed blade. I really thought that you would try something more offensive against my flame stance. Yes, well, I figured that I might simply surprise you. Let us assume that you put that much thought into your choosing of a fighting style. Come at me then. I am granting you the advantage. Zhangken slashed forward. A futile attempt, Gale immediately hopped back and using Zhangken's uncontrolled step forward, they slashed for a weak point. The sword collided. Gale immediately stabilized while Zhangken's own stance wavered. Sloppy. Gale used a chance and slashed out again, this time horizontally. Zhangken tried to duck backwards, but lost his own footing. He dodged barely by changing his angle immediately. Fool, you are just widening your opening like this. A determined step forward kept their movement flowing, and they utilized momentum, delivering a heavy vertical hit. Zhangken, after finding his balance again, grabbed the sword with both hands and blocked. His core was shaken and he fell, but Gale spun around to recover from the stagger while also keeping the energy flowing. You are thinking with the wrong weapon. A one-handed sword lets you dodge easier. They took a few steps back as if dancing, and once again came in for the attack. The sound of a snap sounded through the hall. A small flame had grown out of Gale's sleeve after Zhangken used a spark to place some of the flame he had stored up onto them. Gale's eyes darted towards their sleeve and then swiftly back in the direction of their opponent, who felt a sense of self-fulfillment. Zhangken's weapon now rested in his non-dominant hand, while his fingers remained in the form taken on after using his spark. Gale simply sighed as they noticed that Zhangken had no intention to wield the sword properly again. With one hand, they simply killed the flame, making its dying breath with a hiss. Zhangken felt disheartened and dropped his guard, focusing on the spot that he planted the fire on. Foiled this easily. He could not see the follow-up attack coming and aimlessly swung his blade around. Gale feigned a strike and spun around, stopping with the sword's tip right at their opponent's throat. You are dead. You should use more fire if you want to actually harm me, or distract me even. As you can not burn me directly, you should also have chosen a different spot for application. Learn how to wield a weapon if I teach you how to. Every breath that tries to teach but does not reach you is wasted. Pay attention where I demand it. Everyone knows that you can easily absorb the lessons that you are interested in. Or stop coming to my lectures altogether so as not to waste mine, yours, and everyone else's time. They sigh and pull the sword back, then simply beckoned for the other blade. Dull. The same sensation went through the room again, people shuddering at the pure power flowing from Gale's mouth. The swords were placed back where they belonged, and Gale looked back to the small patch of burnt fabric on their shoulder. Such an insignificant attempt at diversion. What were you thinking? That the combination of smell and optical change would get you distracted enough for me to strike properly? Perhaps try to go a little bigger next time. Why not entirely on my jacket, or plant it on my glasses? It wouldn't have worked on your glasses. They are made of iron and glass. You know my spark doesn't work like others. Which simply shows me that you cannot be trusted with expanding on it on your own. You will have to adapt, eventually. Thanks. They turned towards the students who had watched the quick duel, eyes focused as they wandered through the rows. I present to you all a prime example as to why you are not to slack off in regards to your training. First and foremost, you should learn basic stances for any of the commonly used weapons and how they are utilized during combat. Not like practicing against normal weapons will give you any advantage against creatures that act on instinct. Once the rainy season stops, we can practice outside where everyone will have ample room. Take my teachings to heart, and you will surely not find yourself in a situation like our dear Zhangken here. You can be sure that I do not plan to find myself in any sort of situation again anytime soon. Thank you very much. With this, you are dismissed. Read up on what we went through, and try to think of any way to apply your own magical abilities towards weaponized combat. The crowd of students lifted slowly, packing their books and writing utensils as their gaze lingered on Zhangken and Gale in front, some filled with pity, others with curiosity, and yet more with valor to do better. Gale gave Zhangken a pat on the shoulder, a rare sign of affection from the usually cold professor. Their arms was muscular in a particular way, slightly thicker arms than an average person would have, for hiding the exactly trained muscles. In comparison, Zhangken's own muscles were barely maintained and simulated at best, leftovers from his days at home where he was asked to carry materials of any kind for townsfolk and merchants alike. Was this really necessary? You know that I can't grasp any of those techniques and stances described in the books that you recommended to me. Gale shook their head and sighed heavily as they scraped together a number of documents and cleaned up the blackboard. When they stood in front of Zhangken with crossed arms again, their eyes analyzed him from the utmost tuft of hair to his shoes. You are in terrible shape. Even I could see that. This was simply an important lesson for the class and for you to take better care of yourself. I do care for myself. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here, standing, breathing. Zhangken, you are shaking, likely due to malnutrition if I were to make a guess. Additionally, you stink. Horribly. I stink? Of what? Smoke, writing ink, paper. I wouldn't call that an unpleasant smell exactly. Gale sighed at the response. Your clothes and furs are dusty. You are not taking care of yourself, and this worries me. What have you been doing? Of course you were reading. Your obsession with the sovereign despite your lack of faith is frankly disturbing. Why not simply accept him as the ruler of the now? Because I just can't concentrate on anything else, Gale. Ever since I was young, I knew that there was something wrong with the stories that we have been told. Something wrong with the god of our world? Are you listening to yourself? What is there to be wrong with divine will? Everything we know of the world could be wrong. We are living in times without war. We have been for 2,000 years. And you have the gall to say that this is wrong? Peace? That's not what Why are you hesitating then? Do you desire for the fires of conflict to burn the world to the ground once again? Because you believe that the stories are not accurate? I don't want war, Gale. I simply want the truth. So, what would you do once you uncover it? Perhaps, even if it is a lie, there is a reason that the truth is shrouded. For the better. A heavy sigh left Gale as he pinched their snout. I was worried about you. I am worried about you. You have been absent from too many lessons recently, and I have not seen you in the dining hall either. As I said, I was busy researching. You need to understand that no matter your ambition, they will not do you any good if you are in your grave. You are only 30 years old. Your entire life is still ahead of you. No need to rush. I know. Fine then. You seem to understand, and you even made an effort to fight back during the lesson. I will see what help that I can offer you. Upon hearing these words, Zhangken's mood brightened. A glimmer returned to his eye. One that had vanished when he felt the bitter defeat at his friend's hand. I discovered this in one of the books that I had been reading. It's obviously a ripped-out page, but there's something written on this side. To me, it seems like some strange code that I cannot decipher at all. Perhaps you have heard of Caellam before? After Zhangken took up the piece of paper and waved it towards the professor, Gale held it in their own hands and narrowed their eyes. And you are sure that you did not accidentally rip this out yourself? You claimed it to be a note of sorts, not belonging to the original book? Yes, look. Zhangken turned the corner around and pointed excitedly at the writing on the other side. Despite being almost closed already, Gale squinted their eyes even further, discolored pupils trying to scrutinize the contents of the paper as much as they could. I am going to be fully honest with you. I do not see a difference. What do you see that I do not? The text is clearly prescribed. You can see that there are no lines or anything that would indicate that a feather or a stylus had used them. But rescribes perfectly replicate the original. How could you be so sure? Just feel this side, then on the other. Clearly that there's a relief here from putting an object down, like a quill or a stylus. But the other side here, simply slammed into the paper, just like the rescribes do it. That is quite the attention that you are spending to minuscule details like this. Discerning if something has been handwritten or not was one of Caellam's very first lessons. It's rather easy once you understand the concept. Honestly, I would rather keep myself from his curriculum. My parents may trust him, but he encourages people to stray from the sovereign too much. Additionally, the ink that the verdant tongue is written in has a different coloration, same as a page number. The note is a message from someone, and they are, or were, at the academy. Gale looked up at the explanation and opened their eyes again, tilting their head and smirking slightly. Full glad I am that your studies are bearing fruit. But where in all of this do I fit in? I will not be able to tell you what page this torn-out piece belongs to. In excitement, Zhangken began waving around the note even more, his tail swishing back and forth while his ears began to twitch. It was quite a different sight from Gale, who kept full control of their expressions. I wanted to ask you if you knew if any professor, faculty member, or student had this writing style. Of the code, I mean. And why should I? Come now, don't act coy about it. Everyone knows that you can easily recognize if a student wrote someone else's test. Because I control all the tests of a single class. Yes, but this stays true even if someone who already graduated helps a student. I know it happened before. So, you want me to breach the duty's trust that has been imposed on me for a little puzzle that might as well be the combination to the safeguarding vault of a professor or student attending the academy, trying to entice me that I shall shirk my many responsibilities for you, a friend of 1 year. Is that correct? Indeed it is. Even if I could, I do not have the foggiest whose writing this might be. Ashes. But I do think that I know someone who could potentially help us. The lead librarian is on shift tonight, and his spark might be of use. The head librarian? Which one is that again? The sheep? I doubt that you have seen him at all. He usually works when the fewest people occupy the library space. So how will his spark help us? Please, just wait and see. I assume you have shelves of books turning to food for the dust mites that might as well pay for occupying your room. You should hand some of them in as well, just as I have a volume that needs to be returned. So we meet at the library on the second moonrise today? I am glad that you know my preferred times by now. Additionally, please, Zhangken. Yes? Take a bath and wash your clothes, or at least wear a new change, and apply some perfume. I implore you. Huh? Professor Caellam might have a soft spot for you, but that does not excuse you being a nuisance to everyone's noses. I am not a nuisance. Yes, you are. A massive one. To the general peace of everyone. Hey! No, I shall not argue over this. We will see each other at the library. Do not be late. And do not stink. Confused and agitated, Zhangken took his things and slowly ascended the wooden stairs of the lecture hall, his ears catching a sigh from below. He wanted to avoid a bath, or at least he would put on another set of clothes and change his bandage as well. When Zhangken looked back to see his friend's face, a smile quickly faded as their gaze met, and Zhangken himself felt a tug on the corners of his mouth as his tail swished from side to side in excitement. Gale was already waiting for Zhangken as he entered the massive library located in the academy. The smell of paper, smoke, and flame was not all too different from that of his own room, but as the windows in the library were hidden to let as little natural light inside as possible, the smell could build up in other ways instead. For a few moments, Zhangken stared at the massive statue of Brian Twistwood, the Academy's founder, and turned up his nose. Just because he was credited as the first teacher of Spark, it didn't mean that he had to be revered as a god in here. It was ridiculous to have portraits, insignias, and statues of him in every corner, with every doorknob looking like an antler as well. In only a year, Zhangken had gotten more than tired of his signs everywhere. How could anyone in their right mind work at this place? He carried a few books that had been waiting to be returned to the library and saw his friend brought some as well. His paws moved slowly about on the carpet. Zhangken's steps slowed down as, once again, he was overwhelmed by the amount of knowledge collected in these halls. He approached the wooden table that Gale had seated themselves at with an unsteady step. Located next to them stood a rather respectable stack of papers, of which one had been placed in front of them, who was staring at it, quill in hand, shaking their head in frustration. Zhangken himself tried to steal a glance and winced as he saw the neat handwriting. With the exact knowledge of who it belonged to, he felt his fur bristle slightly and averted his eyes. He took a slight turn and sat down next to Gale, looking at the book before them instead of the paperwork. Sorry, Mother assigned me to a new case that has been getting worse lately. A case? Since when do you have to play the role of a lawman? Person. Banditry at the marketplace. Someone has been stealing produce and currency. All matters that had happened in and around the academy are to be solved by staff. Why aren't your parents appointing someone with actual expertise for this? I feel like between research and whatever surrounds your work as a professor, you shouldn't be tasked with this. This issue lies wherein we lack professional personnel for filing the necessary paperwork for damage, reimbursement, and countermeasures. So I do it. Zhangken wanted to prod the injustice further, but he already felt like Gale was putting up defenses, so he tried to steer the topic away. What about the book? I think that I've seen it before. I could have sworn Caellam read it once and recommended it to me. The book showed a lush green meadow with an even brighter green moon in the sky. Two blurry figures were on their way to a building in the distance. The title read, Mementos, Twixt the Grasp of Truthful Moons, a Romantic Anthology. I thought that with everything going on in your life, you'd be adverse to reading stories like this. Self-indulgent romance novels? How come? I am studying them. Surely an answer Zhangken didn't expect. Excuse me? I study the expression of romance. Romance is being preached by the ascendants as something everyone should strive for. After all, it was a love for his deceased partner that made the king change the world. Surely you know love, though. Gale was always surrounded by people of all walks of life. How come they never had felt anything for any of them? So, did it help you? With a thick book like this, surely one of the stories must have struck a chord, yes? I am unsure if they actually helped me in understanding. Most stories have something in common. They were said to be translations or interpretations of stories from the old world. Old world stories? Why would you read those? Do not be a fool. I do not denounce all things of the old world as bad or antiquated. Modern love stories simply all feel as if they are trying to emulate the story between the sovereign and his tactician. I have read plenty about them. These stories all share a common thread as well, but it is more about leaving behind the old and embracing something new. The protagonists would be leaving behind everything that they know and finding the one that they love. They are torn forcefully from their home and brought somewhere else. Other worlds inspired by the locales foreign to the authors. Do they share common endings as well? In most cases, the protagonist stays in the new world with their lover. In others, one or both of them die, yet others have two lovers once again separated by returning the protagonist to their home. Bittersweet endings always hurt my soul. After all the tragic retellings I read, I enjoy one where the two lovers end up happily ever after. But did any of the stories answer your question? They did not help me. I understand the drive to explore something new, to grasp the hand of discovery and walk alongside it, but doing it for some stranger or good friend? It is quite a decision to take. Yet to take the role of a royal's pet, of a freedom fighter, or that of a monarch to please those you love, I find that to be a huge step away from the ordinary life these people were leading. Because it is more of a metaphor? Few people would go to such extremes nowadays. But the sovereign did take up the role of God to fulfill his own dream and that of his partner. For a peaceful, perfect world. Yes, perfect. Oh, come on now. Do we have to truly argue over this once again? At the library of all places. Why can't you simply not accept that the current state of Sarek is what is best for it and the people on it? Because it feels like we are wasting away here. We simply cannot advance society to some degree that the old world was at with just our little sparks that let us shape things and put one thing from one location to the other. Perhaps that is for the better then. Without rapid progress, we can count on resources being evenly distributed, thus conflicts do not arise as he decreed. Ashes to his decrees. War can be avoided in other ways, then disallowing research into the old world technologies. At least we are allowed to keep the Sodite systems. I do not enjoy them. I know. Why are you so obsessed with proving all that we know wrong anyways? What would change? Where would it get us? Where would it get you? I am so obsessed with it. Well, because it is not where it ends, right? If the Ascension itself is already fabricated, then who is the man truly that sits on the capitals and thus the world's throne? If the way that he ascended, why and how is already a lie, then how many of the rules he imposed to us are truly what we are told that they are? He says that there is no more strife and yet people still fight, unseen and in silence. That is why I need to know the truth. If there is more to uncover, that is where to start. Ahem. I am sorry to disrupt your argument, but as previously requested, I would have time to try and help you now. The librarian, who had previously been busy behind a wooden counter, spoke up with a pleasantly calm voice. Zhangken had often seen the wooden counter the man was now beckoning from, but never the man himself. A few candles on the metal holders were put along the counter to provide the large red wolf with light while he did his work. Well then, Professor Gale, how can I help? The wolf loomed over the both of them. His broad shoulders and high stature made Zhangken question if he had always aspired to be a librarian, or if he might be a retired warrior. His mane was long and dyed black, parting only at the forehead to reveal a white scar. A tired kindness was drawn over his face as he watched the two approach. Taking up the night shift must do that to someone. The man had come from the mountains and ever since worked in the library, not only caring for the books but also telling stories to those that were willing to listen. Thank you for making the time. We are looking for a certain book with a ripped out corner, likely on the lowest right. A most curious request, but one that I should be able to assist with. Thanks a lot. If we can just solve this, or we get a few steps closer to understanding the broader picture, we... Wait just a moment. Aren't you Zhangken, the fire boy from the Shorelands? Yes, that's me. Well, I wouldn't call myself fire boy by any means, but I think you have quite a few books that need to be returned, especially because some of them have been requested frequently. Did you bring them? Zhangken had never really interacted with the Red Wolf before, but was not surprised for his infamy. He knew that his reputation preceded him. It was the same at home, in Sealy as well. With a swift motion, he put down the books he managed to bring along. All of them would have been far too many for his untrained arms to carry. Each cover was slightly stained, either by wax or soot, and with every tarnished work, the wolf's disdain grimace deepened. He has not yet remarked on your smell, so you must have at least changed your clothing. I commend you for this. Gale's hushed tone had a hint of playful rudeness hidden underneath. Zhangken refused to respond. I shall tend to the books later. The flat tone did not escape Zhangken's ears, but he also admitted that he could have treated them a little bit better. At least by not having them rest near his candles or the fireplace. Well then, let's see if I can find that book of yours. The librarian lifted his foot and stomped on the floor. The sound of the leather boots hitting the wood was accompanied by a slight metallic jingle. Zhangken assumed that it belonged to the chain that had an attached vessel of ink at the wolf's ankle. As he felt the energy of the cast spark flow through him to soak into the library, Zhangken instinctively looked at his ring to measure the ink that he had left inside. The few uses had not drained much of the mystical substance, but it was clearly not filled to the brim anymore. The Gale was not concerned with his own vessel at all. They made sure that it was filled to the brim every single day. They would never appear in public with less than their full potential. Just a few moments of silence later, books started to fly onto the counter. With just a few gestures, the wolf commanded the books to open up, all showing a page that had a single ripped-out corner at the bottom right. That's very specific of a spark to train in. Manipulating dead wood as a subset of earth is already hard. Books are a step further as the wood is mixed with other elements. Years of training and my love for books allowed me this very rare ability, though. Zhangken was yet again impressed by how fascinating sparks were. In their essence, they seemed restrictive, but the more one played in the areas of the six elements, the more specific forms of reshaping like this could be born. Yet even like this, specific training would be needed to spread abilities like these worldwide, making them more a detriment than a blessing. What moved you to train in manipulating books? A story for another time, perhaps. When we meet over tea and biscuits. For now, I would like you to keep on your own research so that I can return to my work. The student nodded and held the scraps of paper next to the books in comparison. This one has a different paper altogether. The page number is different for these two. And this one doesn't match up with the text at all. Thank you for the help, but none of these match up with what I was looking for. The librarian's features softened and he stacked the books up once again. We'll find what you're looking for somehow. But first, we will have to sort the books back, together with the ones that you have brought in. Are you not going to use your spark for that? Oh no, calling them is easy, but sorting them back where they belong is almost impossible due to the way that I perceive things when using my spark. Also, if we relied solely on my spark for library work, I would be severely overworked, and that is not what I came to the Flatlands for. The wolf let out a hearty laugh. So that's why the academy lets students work in the library? Exactly. Working in your free time is rewarding. Additionally, we pay decently well, as you know from the few times that you did decide to help out around here. Let us see who is on shift today. There it is. Arya, could you please help us out? From behind a bookshelf, a small wolverine girl peeked and slowly made her way to the counter. Gale gave a courtesy nod and the girl herself tried to muster a hasty bow. Zhangken forgot how much Gale was revered by the students. They were just another person to him. Please sort these books in. Perhaps start with the anthology collection. Romantic fiction N-to-M shelf section 12, if I am not mistaken. Yes, sir. It will be done in a moment. Wait. No, wait. The incomplete shape finally clicked into place with a single missing piece. Slowly the realization struck. The spark of an idea finally lit up, igniting the dark caves of Zhangken's thoughts. A resolve mechanism made him groan in an embarrassingly loud tone. There was never an object that belonged to him. He could have looked up the most outlandish ciphers and not found a solution to what was scribbled on the scrap. It was simple. We go. Leaving the library? Of course not. We are going to the history section. Letters M to N. A rare one-note laugh escaped Gale as the two left for the aforementioned section. The shelves might have looked like any other, all things considered except for the iron plate on the outer side pairing the rows with the other history shelves. Rows N to M were located here and, at that moment, so were Gale and Zhangken. The inquisitive pair found the fourth shelf easily enough, which left them to the task of having to identify where their target was located. Luckily, no one else was looking for anything in these shelves, so they could scour the books for anything useful. As much as I dislike wasting productive time with you here, I do feel proud that you managed to solve the issue by yourself. I hope that you are feeling accomplished. I mostly feel stupid, to be frank. Also, stop treating me like I'm an ashen child, Gale. We're the same age and you know that. I think the documents that I looked over filled you a year younger than me. Ugh. Shut it and help me look for whatever we are looking for. Now, is that how you should speak to a friend or a professor? Help me. Please? Now we are finally approaching territory that I enjoy walking. I will see if I can find anything interesting in N, yes? You keep your eyes on M. Fantastic. Thank you. An exclamation oozed with sarcasm, and Zhangken was happy to end the conversation there, as just a moment longer of this treatment would have likely led to a few burned books, which he could probably not have afforded. The search did not go over smoothly as Zhangken had hoped. It turned out that The 4 did not stand for the 4th shelf, but for some additional piece of information. Gale likely knew, but Zhangken did not want to give them the triumph. He tried a few ideas already, checking the 4th shelf, looking at the 4th page of the 4th book from both the left and the right side of the bookshelf. He looked for book titles using the same number, which led him to find some gems that he could study soon, such as manifold historic reverence of the 4 basic elements, the majesty of splitting the world into 4 regions, and his favorite, mysterious poetry, the number 4. Zhangken knew that he would have to have a word with the librarian about the selection of books that they brought in here at some point. Eventually his eyes got to the diaries of the last king, sorted into M for the assignment title, Memories of the Old World. Caellam had recovered these from the Old World ruins, as they were fonts of the knowledge of the Old World culture and history. But as usual, there was a core issue with them. They were indecipherable due to the language that they were written in. They were labeled by volume 1 to 8. One had been found in every set of ruins that Caellam explored so far. Strange how there were only one of these in every set of ruins. A mystery for another day, Zhangken thought as he opened volume 4 without any expectations. Yet, against all odds, he did find something. As he flipped through the pages, a pair of black gemstones hit the wooden floor with a sudden noise. Gale swiftly turned to him, only to see the sound's source themselves. Are those... Sodites, yes. They just fell from the book I opened. The diary? Why ever would they be in there? Other than this being the 4th volume, no other association with the number 4 is present. Perhaps because these are 2 sets of 4. After all, the twofold nature of things is important in Ascension, no? 2 moons, 2 spark subsets. 2 times 2 plus 2 elements. So, with that in mind, you assume that these 2 Sodites you uncovered are connected to the little mystery that we have been chasing? I don't assume so. I am very sure about their connection to it. As Zhangken picked up the stones on the floor and prepared his ring to bring a droplet of ink onto them, Gale immediately interrupted him. What are you doing? I assume the spark stored in these is relevant to my research, so I want to activate them. You fool! It might as well be a trap to burn down the library. I could immediately contain any fire, you know that. What if there was water saved in them, making all the books unreadable and drowning us all? That argument did make Zhangken shiver. Let us discuss this tomorrow. If you are so eager to see what is inside the stones, let us ask Caellam to join as well. Dinner, perhaps? I shall ask him to bring a way to stop the Sodites from expelling as well. Fine. I know you just don't want me to stay awake all night over whatever might be inside. But perhaps it is a good idea to stop here. I am glad that you understand. Zhangken did understand, but he was not glad about it. Before leaving the library himself, Zhangken stopped by the librarian again, who had settled into a chair reading a book in the dim candlelight. So you returned. Did your search yield any fruit? Maybe. We found a pair of Sodites, but we will have to investigate it if they are connected to what we are looking for. Sodites, so you say. Where exactly? Zhangken explained the situation, and the librarian only cocked a brow. Odd. These books. Well, they aren't the most popular if I'm being honest with you. How come? They are the originals, still waiting to be replicated by rescribes. Professor Caellam is waiting for the other members of the Old World Historian Association to pick them up. So we can't give them out, and their use is strongly monitored. What kept them from being removed then? A secret system that I can't tell you about, lest you exploit it. I see. So if they are monitored, as you said, do you know who tampered with them and put the Sodites between the pages? Unfortunately, we do not record the identity of the people unless they damage the books or remove them beyond a certain point. Has that happened before? This is information that I cannot disclose. I can tell you, though, that at least ever since the last book, the 8th one, has been delivered here, no one had ever touched any of them. Unless it was the person who delivered the books here themselves. Zhangken murmured to himself as he began walking out the library. Have a wonderful night. And you as well. Zhangken's thoughts were racing at the thought that Caellam may have set up this discovery by himself for someone to find. But why? If there was a truth to be found out there in the world that might change the perception of God, why not tell the ones that were most interested in the topic? A river of thought streamed through the caves of his mind, reaching every crevice. Now was not the time to sleep. It was time to research further. White. An endless expanse of white. Or rather, nothingness, non-existence, purity, stillness. Words that could be used for what I was experiencing. An experience that I enjoyed to return to as I fell asleep in my bed, like every night. A chance to finally rest, to truly rest, without the pressing of reality weighing upon my shoulders. It is perhaps because of this that I am blessed in this realm with impotence. Whatever body this dream bestowed upon me, I cannot even see it through the peripheral vision. I do not feel myself breathing. I am unable to move. There are no sounds for me to hear, no flavor in the air for me to taste. Nothingness, void. The only true bliss my cursed being ever experienced. I long forfeited the thought of using the time here for anything practical, as the memories and thoughts of this transient experience are not granted to my waking self. Thus, before life returns to me, that is, resting in bed, I shall stop thinking. I enjoy those moments of letting my ever-swarming thoughts rest. Yes, peace of mind. What? What was that sound? It could have been a footstep, but as if someone was walking on water. Like a single drop of rain found its way into a cave that had been secluded since its creation. Disturbance. How? Why? It had been like this simply me, by myself ever since I can remember. Well now, we finally made it. I told you that we could actually meet up again here. We just had to try hard enough. Now, about the plan. We're setting out by tomorrow to... Silence, whelp. Dost thou not feel the presence of another? The enemy might be present. Do not foolishly name our plan while it can hear us. What are you talking about? Do not speak my name. Their art feedest the creature's mind with our plans. We shall not uncover our identities. This place is no longer secure. Well, what if whoever is listening is not our enemy? What if it is a friend? I shall not hear thy foolish arguments. It simply listens and would have spoken up, were it able to communicate. We must make haste and leave at once. The presence of the voice vanished. It was unlike anything that I had ever felt before, booming and intruding into my mind like roots digging into the heart of the soil itself. But it was gone now, leaving the other presence behind. I tried to reach out, but I could not speak words to tell them that I was here, that I did not mean them ill. Excuse my partner. He enjoys being cautious. But he is in the right. I cannot reveal my identity to a potential servant of him. Yet, if our meetings here keep on overlapping, well, perhaps it means that the red string of fate is stitching paths into our lives. Thus, if she wills it so, we shall meet once again. Gods be with you, stranger. And with that, I felt life returning to my body, memories leaving my grasp. Was there truly more than one god? Who? Just talk to me. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. So, we've met our protagonist, Zhangken. I believe he is a sable, even though he looks a bit wolfish. I don't know, because it hasn't been said, why he has a bandaged eye, and they kind of make it a point to literally block out that eye. I'm assuming eventually we'll find out why it's been bandaged, and if it will remain like that. It would be interesting if it was like, ooh, he has like a cursed eye or something, I don't know. Or Well, no, this goes with the second portion of the of this build, so I'll keep that for later. But considering that the world is kind of on a schedule imposed by this sovereign character, I am wondering if something happened that didn't fit the whole little thing that has been set up by this sovereign, this god king, that caused them to lose or something his eye. Anyways, we have also met two of the other, I guess you could call them supporting characters for this story, I'm assuming. Caellam the raccoon. I'm not sure if it's actually a raccoon or a tanuki, because he kind of looks like a tanuki. Because I've never seen a raccoon that didn't have their little bandit mask that went like that connected both of the eyes, because that one isn't connecting it, and that one's actually going off to the sides, and that's usually what a tanuki's does. In case you don't know, it's a raccoon dog. Anyways, but there's also Gale, who I'm assuming is a fox. I think because they have like a very Lilith body, very slim. Not to say feminine like characteristics, but like very fox-like, I guess is the proper way to say it. But back to Caellam, I am assuming that this professor has more or less kind of not fed, but like encouraged this obsession with the sovereign and figuring out what's going on with them, as opposed to Gale, who's sort of like, why do you keep, poking at the subject? Like, can't you just sort of leave it alone? Kind of like the religious person that's that just sort of like rolls their eyes at you when you like question, the religion, try to poke holes in it, and they're like, oh, there's Zhangken, doing his little blasphemous thing, bless his heart. And then there's Caellam, who's like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead, research furry Jesus and, see if he was real or not. That kind of feels like how these two characters are portrayed. Then of course there's, Jean, who's doing the research. The playing card will come in to play next part. Also, the whole thing with the sovereign, I guess, ascending to godhood, and I guess mandating a sort of, I hesitate to call it a schedule because it's not so much a schedule as it is he imposed his will on the world. I'm assuming this happened because, of the lost love, or he's like, well, why can't I control the world? So I became a god king, and now I can control the way the world works. So I'm assuming that's why that happened. But I'm assuming Zhangken Ken wants to figure out if that's true or what. Not entirely sure yet. And then there's this whole, like, the two people that were talking in Zhangken's dream. So, like, what's up with that? Also, the fact that he forgets his dreams, so it's like, oh, people are talking in your dreams, but you're gonna forget it, so, oh well. Anyway, so yeah, write down in the comments what you think, and channel members, of course, the channel members, the cool people who decided to support, the channel by throwing money at it for a few perks. Actually, though, something that I did want to discuss with the channel members specifically, because this has to deal with them more than it has to do with anybody else. But somebody approached me recently about opening up a Discord for you guys specifically. So, I mean, it kind of did sound a little fishy. But at the same time, I was like, I don't talk to people enough on here to want to have a Discord where I would have you guys there and then like sort of feel obligated to talk. But not like it's an obligation, but more like oh, now I have to chat like outside of YouTube, and that feels very anxiety inducing. But I was wondering if you guys were interested in that. If you would like to have, at least for the channel members for now, to have exclusive, like, Discord server privileges. I'm not exactly sure what, what that would do, considering that you can just join a Discord server for the visual novels that I read already. But I guess you could discuss the videos that I uploaded or talk about what I talk about here or whatever, like on the server specifically. So I will post a poll as soon as these videos go up, and as soon as I see that people are actually watching them, for the channel members first, obviously. And if you guys say like, oh yeah, I would want a Discord server for your channel, like as an exclusive thing or whatever, then I guess I will contact the person and say like, okay, fine, give me the server. Although I will mention though, one of the reasons why I did hesitate to do it is because, in case you guys haven't noticed or nobody has ever told you, YouTube channel's success comes from the fact that people will like the videos and subscribe to the channels in order to be able to grow the channel. So you also you have to interact with the channel, with the videos and stuff like that. So that's how YouTube says, oh, people are watching these things. Let me, get it out to the wider audience. Let me show it to more people that are interested in this type of thing. Because otherwise, it just sort of doesn't do anything with you. So to sort of extend the conversation elsewhere that isn't YouTube is sort of like, ooh, I don't know if I should do that. But yeah, I mean, I guess it is a perk that I could offer. I'm not really sure what I would do with the channel, but like, just like say yes or no in the poll, I guess. Anyway, so yeah. Thank you all for watching / listening. If you would like to play Sparks: A Tale of Ink yourself, you can do so by going down into the link in the description for the Sparks Twitter page, where you can get a direct link to download the game and play it yourself, or you can just go to itch.io and download it from there. And I will also be posting down a link for their Ko-fi in case you want to support this project, because they don't have a Patreon. You support them through Ko-fi. And I'm not really sure how that would work. Like, because normally with Patreon, you get early access to builds of, the visual novels that they're doing. With Sparks, it would just be you want to donate to the creation of the project and not expect anything in return until they set up a Patreon or whatever, I guess. I don't know if in the Patreon you are given access to builds of it. You would have to check yourself. But that will be linked down in the description along with my other pertinent links in case you want to support me through other, channels, through other ways. Because you can do monthly subscriptions for Ko-fi, so maybe that's how they're doing it. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah. So I guess that's it for now, and I will see you guys in the next part. Bye-bye.